Russian President Vladimir Putin was afraid to hold a large-scale naval parade in his hometown of St. Petersburg on the day of the Russian Federation Navy. As a rule, this is one of the most important days in terms of Putin's image. The parade is broadcast on television screens. Putin usually boasts about the might of his navy, but this time he had to comment on the situation in accordance with the realities on the ground. The Russian president emphasized that he is monitoring the exercises of the Russian naval forces in a working mode. The parade, as we clearly understand, was cancelled out of fear due to the drone attack. It was precisely because of this attack that the St. Petersburg International Airport had to be closed for 6 hours. As a result, the press secretary of the Russian president, Peskov, along with other officials, was forced to wait for hours on the plane in order to get to St. Petersburg and comment on Putin's actions and statements. For several extended hours, the Russian president was compelled to act as his very own personal press secretary because Peskov was unfortunately stuck in the bustling capital city of the Russian Federation. And this situation, with the effective cancellation of the Grand Parade, was once again meant to remind Putin that the war between Russia and Ukraine is not just about Russian missiles and drones destroying Ukrainian infrastructure, killing women and children, and paralyzing life in peaceful Ukrainian cities. It is also a situation where Ukrainian drones can paralyze the infrastructure of the Russian Federation and in fact call into question the very possibility of further functioning of civil aviation in the aggressor state. And of course, there are obvious problems with the parades as well. When Putin is essentially forced to hide from Ukrainian drones, and this is not the first time, thus the logic of a war of attrition, which Putin chose to replace his failed blitzkrieg of 2022, can work both ways. This also applies to the rapid development of drones on both the Russian and Ukrainian sides. And Ukraine does not need permission from its Western allies to use Ukrainian drones to attack targets important to Russians on days that matter to them. This also includes Western sanctions, which can paralyze certain sectors of the Russian economy. And it is becoming clear that if American President Donald Trump, who is gradually beginning to realize that Putin has no intention of ending the war with Ukraine, starts putting pressure not only on the President of the Russian Federation, but also on his partners in the Global South. This could call into question the development of the Russian oil and oil refining industry. Moreover, the oil refining industry could be targeted both by Donald Trump's sanctions and by Ukrainian drones, as has already been demonstrated during the previous period of intense Russian-Ukrainian confrontation. Putin, of course, can certainly pretend that he doesn't really need any grand parades and that it's entirely enough for him to simply observe the impressive actions of the Russian naval forces from the deck of a small patrol boat. However, everyone perfectly understands how much the President of the Russian Federation needs to demonstrate the greatness of his own state in order to remind everyone that only capitulation to it can end the Russian-Ukrainian war, at least to end it in the way that Putin desires. And instead of greatness, Russian officials have to wait for several hours in a row for their official planes to take off because they are not allowed into Putin's hometown. Instead of greatness, Russian airports now have to announce almost every day and every night a suspension of departures or arrivals of flights. And among these airports, as we know, are the capitals Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Domodedovo, and now, as we see, St. Petersburg's Pulkovo Airport, and even the international airport of Putin's favorite resort, Sochi, where recently Russian citizens were stranded for many hours. Citizens indifferent to the killing of peaceful residents in Ukraine, but not indifferent to their own vacations in the humid climate of the Caucasian resort. So it can be said that with each day of the Russian-Ukrainian war, with each month, with each new year of this fierce confrontation between Russians and Ukrainians, the war will come not only to Ukrainians, but also to Russians. Their existence too will turn into a daily reality of endless war of attrition, which will force the vast majority of citizens of the Russian Federation to give up their accustomed way of life in favor of security measures and the realization that they are constantly living in an atmosphere of uncertainty due to hostile attacks. And of course, there is one logical solution to all of this to end the aggression against Ukraine, to withdraw from the territories that have been occupied by the Russian Federation since 2014, to at least try to return to the civilized world, and to recognize the futility of attempts to destroy international law. However, it is clear that this is not a solution for Putin, who still believes that a prolonged war will help him eliminate Ukrainian statehood and annex the territory of the neighboring country to the Russian Federation. This is not in line with the logic of the Russians, who are convinced that the best government is the one that annexes foreign territories and punishes those inhabitants who are unable to recognize the necessity of submitting to Russian will. This is the starting point for the Russian army, which has always been the focus of its leadership's attention only when it continued aggressive wars, destroyed foreign cities, and killed foreign citizens. So, hoping that the Russian leaders and their compatriots will draw logical and rational conclusions from what precisely happened today in the vibrant city of St. Petersburg is utterly pointless. But at the same time, when such unpleasant events keep happening regularly and become commonplace, sooner or later this will force Russians to realize the futility of their hopes that a years-long, endless war will bring them Ukraine, rather than destruction and hopelessness in their own lives within the Russian Federation, which, as a rule, is the outcome of any endless war, no matter who hopes to benefit from its result. Russians are not in for parades. What awaits them is the obvious disappointment in their aggressive plans. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel. Subscribe.